I'm Jeremiah Monk, recently retired colonel from U.S. Air Force, previously assigned to U.S. Special Operations Command. I was the Chief of Plans and Strategy, the J51 at U.S. SOCOM for 2.5 years, and then I took over a project using the tenets of design really to implement an enterprise-wide culture change initiative, uh, which we called the Comprehensive Review Implementation. All that was really part of my journey into the world of design. We're trying to look at how do we tackle complex problem sets, and especially with a very limited toolkit that we had at our disposal. The principles of design I found really helped broaden my perspective and the perspective of my team to be able to handle some of those issues. I love this question. Just one of the real aspects about design is conveying new and unique ideas through the power of metaphor and storytelling. And I think using the term archipelago is particularly relevant in this, in that there are so many different little areas and perceptions and applications of design that there is no singular school. It really is a whole bunch of islands, but put together it forms a larger whole. Um, I I like to use the metaphor of design as essentially a religion. It's a belief structure that there is something bigger, there's something better, and that we all have different ways of approaching it. None of them are necessarily wrong. They're all oriented generally in the same direction, but oriented really on making ourselves better. Within that larger metaphor of religion, there are, of course, different religions, and within each religion, different sects, of course. And what we're talking about here is with the archipelago idea is many, many different sects of design. There are the one school of application of design, really, in my perspective, is oriented on solving problems, and there are a variety of different ways to do that. There's human-centered design. There's kind of consumer-based design products. There's services, that kind of thing. But they're generally oriented on a school of addressing a complex problem set and finding unique solutions to that. There's another school, in my opinion, and again, this is a religion that I prescribe to, and not all designers do, that is more so about focusing on an organizational structure, an organization's ability to see, to perceive, and to understand new and different problem sets that you would not have ordinarily seen if you were just focusing on a particular problem. And as an example, take a consumer-based kind of project. If I am a car designer and I am trying to design a better car, I'm going to go in it with a preconception that a car is four wheels, internal combustion engine, and my goal is to make a better vehicle under that construct. The other side would be more like Tesla, where you look at it and like, I want to relook at transportation. What is the need? And then redesign the product totally, or rather get away from cars altogether and get more into other forms of movement altogether. So it's more in terms of looking at the larger problem sets, and then looking at the organizational structure to be able to do those types of focus on those types of problem sets. My island is more on this side. It's more on the organizational structure side. When I see a problem, my first question is always, is that the right problem set? And particularly coming from the chief of plans job, we focus a lot on somewhat archaic problem sets, and when we really should be looking at the way ahead or the changing environmental context. So I would say my island focuses on how do we make ourselves a better organization in order to look at different, unique, undiscovered problem sets. Again, fantastic. And this is really where we spend so much of our effort in the design community, is just introducing people to the principles. In one word, questioning. Question everything. We humans, we tend to build processes built on best practices that worked for a particular solution, a particular problem set. But then we take that and we apply it to future problem sets without really questioning if it is in fact the right methodology. My advice would be question the process, be the critical thinker, and try to find new, unique solutions and methods in order to attack different problem sets. And oftentimes, by seeking out those different solutions, you'll find totally different capabilities that you had no idea existed in the first place, or they were within the realm of the possible. But without that fresh concept and the critical thinking about what we're doing and why we're doing it, we can get rooted in dogma. My focus of design is on really organizational change and organizational transformation. I like to look at, is an organization even capable of understanding the needs of the environment? And so my going in position is to look not at the problem, but the organization to begin with, and then try to challenge the thought of the people in that organization to be able to think differently. The majority, I would see, of people within this religious sect of design are really highly focused on the educational side, which is absolutely valid and needed. The practitioner side, however, tends to focus more on problem solving versus the organizational adaptation. So I find myself as somewhat of an outlier in that organizational side, where I'm constantly looking at not only introducing people to design and teaching them the concepts, but teaching them how to apply them in such a manner to be creatively destructive to their own organization in order to grow something better. So the culture change initiative that I mentioned in my introduction was really my first macro level attempt at organizational change in order to become. The issue stemmed from, if you recall, a couple of years ago, a series of really tragic events, misbehaviors within the special operations community. You had Eddie Gallagher, you had the Niger shooting, you had some members bringing back drugs from South America, et cetera, and it all kind of happened right around the same time. Our commander, General Clark, decided we needed a holistic review of the U.S. Special Operations Enterprise, appointed a Marine One-Star, did a 9-month deep dive into the enterprise, and they determined that we did not have an ethics problem. Instead, we had a cultural problem. And the culture was, we had for 20 years been racing to the sound of the guns, overextended, at the expense of leadership development and ethical development. So our leaders were too focused on getting into the combat and not properly developing their units ethically and professionally the way they should be. A report came out a year and a half ago, handed it to me and said, okay, here, go implement this. Fix us, which was an interesting challenge, to say the least, in the middle of the COVID pandemic. I immediately called some of my design folks and said, hey, let's look at what this opportunity really is. If I follow the letter of the law here and what they tell me to fix, I don't think it's going to get the results that we're hoping for. So we broke our team into 4 design groups and gave them a general topic to orient on and said, how would you redesign the U.S. Special Operations Enterprise in order to make it better, to take advantage of this opportunity? We got some really pretty wild metaphors and ideas that came out of that. But really, it helped us understand that the prescriptions from the original report were about a 70% solution. And some of them were off base. Some of them were good. And we knew we needed to do it. But there were a whole bunch of missing things out there that we needed to tackle in order to do some of these things. And that's where design really came in, because it helped us challenge our own preconceptions and our own methodologies to be able to look at some of the bigger opportunities there, particularly on the force design and development side, how we build and manage our force, not just apply it and use it in combat, but how do we build it from the ground up, and then what do we need to look like in the future? The ultimate question we were trying to answer was, well, I should back up. The ultimate problem was if we are too forward as a force, if we're spread too thin, we need to be able to figure out how to apply our force more judiciously, which is predicated based on some sort of prioritization matrix. You need to be able to say no in addition to say yes. And therefore, you need to know where a good investment of forces is in order to say no to the other ones. Doing that is based on an understanding that we are properly suited to be able to do those things that we deem are important in the out years. And we're talking 10 to 20 years out here. So in order to, we need to look at what our force needs to look like now, who we need to recruit, what do we need to train them to look like, what capabilities do we need them to do, what authorizations we need from Congress in order to do that, and then start putting those in place now. Otherwise, we're going to come up with a prioritization matrix that's based on current paradigm, the current problem set, which is not going to be applicable 20 years down the road. And that's where the design aspect really helped, where we started, instead of just doing the planning aspect, which as military folks, we tend to gravitate towards the planning methodology. Instead, we started by doing design, which gave us several different opportunities and several different lines that we had to enact in order to get to the larger understanding of where we needed to be as a force, instead of just fixing our force application process. Long answer, sorry. Couple things on this. So one, just the future in general is ripe with opportunity, and that's not just in the military sense, but of course, every day is an increasingly greater period of radical change than the previous. Think of where we are today as opposed to where we were 6 months ago, as where we were 2 years ago. Just incredible change, which really allows us to break down some of those mental barriers, those mental preconceptions that limited us to begin with. One example, electrification. So I'm sure many people are following the infrastructure bill and the current administration's objectives there with updating the electrical grid and electric vehicles and such. 10 years ago, there were no electric vehicles out there. I mean, you had hybrids, but that was about it. And now every third car you see out there is a Tesla, and that's a stepping stone to something else. Imagine what the world will look like 10 years from now if that trend continues. You're talking total realignment of the global order based on fossil fuels. You're talking shifts in power base based on electrification and power grids away from refining type of technologies, increased renewable types of energy, which allows just total changes to our entire infrastructure and our economy. And it's not something we necessarily fear, but it's something that opened up huge opportunities for us. Scaling that discussion back a little bit to the military side, again, lots of opportunities, and you see a paradigm change with the recent decision to pull out of Afghanistan. I don't want to get into the debate of whether that was a good idea or not, but it was a paradigm shift. We're going to stop doing what we were throwing resources and money and people at for 20 years, and we're going to do something different. And what that's going to allow is a change within Western militaries to start to focus on the next threat, whatever that is. And it's probably not going to look like a conventional military threat circa the Cold War, or a nation-state threat circa the Gulf War, or a terrorist threat circa the War on Terror. It's going to look a lot more complicated, a lot more messy. And it's going to be tied a lot closer to economies, to diplomacy, to civil sector, et cetera. So this is a real big opportunity for Western militaries to rethink their budgets, rethink their applications, and their prioritization. On a personal level, I am, like I said, I'm retiring. I'm living the dream here. And my next career leap is going to be into the world of business consulting. And I'm particularly excited to take what I've learned at SOCOM, in the Air Force, and then in the design school, and help apply it to major corporations, help them adapt to those new environments and those new paradigms that are coming down. And I'm excited to take the tools and the people and the connections that I've made just in this design archipelago and help tackle some of those problems going forward, and really find those opportunities and help businesses evolve into what they can be going forward. So again, playing on the metaphor of design as a religion, as well as my own name, I am as far as I know, the sole prophet on this other side, screaming about organizational design. It's me and Simon Sinek, I guess, over here. I think one of the common misconceptions is that design is the first step to military planning, and I think that is a terrible waste of the opportunity presented to us by by what's given to us in design thinking. Military planning is a very regimented procedure that is oriented on a singular end state, generally speaking, and is intended to provide various options to achieve a singular objective. Design flips that on its head, and it has a singular starting point, but variable endpoints that are infinite. So it's more like what is possible, what do I unlock by doing this, and what else can I do now? And it requires a different type of thought. And unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily mesh well with rigid military planning methodologies that are fundamentally oriented on resource attainment towards the end. However, if you try to jam design into that planning methodology, you end up flailing doing design, coming up with great ideas, throwing them all away, and proceeding down the regimented track. So design thinking to me is a totally different way to get at some of these problem sets by looking at them not as things I have to solve, but as opportunities and environments I have to operate within. And then what does that environment allow me to do? And the big difference there is assessment and feedback, the ability to look at contextual changes in the environment and shift and adapt. And design thinking allows you to plan for those different scenarios, or look at the alternatives and then identify where you're not going to achieve what you're hoping to get, and instead shift to be able to do something else. So design thinking to me is a much more it's a school of thought that helps adapt to better complex environments and problem sets, while as military planning is much more suited for complicated problem sets and where best practice would kind of work, but not necessarily in the complex world of today. I'm quoting from the Cynefin framework on that a little bit. So again, back to my time as the J51, the Chief of Plans. I came in to that position right about the same time the 2017 National Defense Strategy was signed and published. And that was really a watershed document for us in that it reoriented the U.S. Defense Department from 20 years of, at the time, 17 years of war on terror to focus on what they're calling great power competition vis-a-vis China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. So I had the task of adapting our planning enterprise to that new document, to that new direction. And this is really where I started toying with some of the organizational change ideas, because everyone could read the document. Everyone saw what we've been directed to do. And then they put it aside and they kept doing what they wanted to do, which was send forces to Afghanistan. Because, by God, this year is the year that we're going to solve it. And we heard that every year for 20 years. So I initially went about it as a good military planner would, by coming up with a plan. Like, here's my plan. Here's what I think we should look like. Here's what we're going to do. Here are the steps. I need you, you, and you to commit forces to this, to do this, and we need people oriented on each of these problem sets. And we're going to build teams, cross-functional teams to get after them. Everyone agreed and said, yeah, that's great, except I'm not giving you my guy. And this is where I ran headlong into a brick wall and realized that I went about it the wrong way. I tried to appeal to logic and what was on the paper instead of appeal to emotions and power bases and resource bases. I tilted against that windmill for a good year and a half. I could not get any directorate in our headquarters to commit resources to the problem sets. Even though I had leadership buy-in, they just didn't want to do it. What finally tipped the scales for me, really, was the culture change initiative. So once I was pulled out of that job and given the task of changing the enterprise culture, we realized that we can't change culture unless we change the mentality of how we apply our forces. And that gave me the ability to say, hey, we need to change the way we're structured in order to be able to comprehend what we should be doing instead of continuing to throw people and money at this meat grinder infinitely. But like so much in design, failure comes first. You have to be able to learn from it and adapt. And what we got at the end was not what I originally conceived. It wasn't even close, but it was functional. And it came at such a time where the new administration came in and recognized that, hey, we at Special Ops Command had built these centers focused on the problem sets, and we were some of the leading thinkers, not just in the military, but in the entire government on the application of non-conventional military force, read all the other instruments of power against these other problem sets. And we started to get phone calls from DC going, hey, can you help us out with some of this? And so ultimately it was a failure, but it became a huge success because really we implemented design instead of a planning methodology. We looked at the environment, we looked at the context and the changes therein, and then started to look at what does our organization need to become in order to take advantage of this new opportunity. So those two stories I told were big examples. They were big accomplishments. However, I think my biggest accomplishment really is getting to this point here today. I started off my career 26 years ago wanting to fly fighters. That anyone goes in the Air Force, that's generally what they want to do. I learned very fast that was not an option for me, but because it was not, other doors opened. And because I was able to take those other steps that were laid out for me, other doors opened. And as a result, I met my wife, had my kids, and ended up where I am today. So really, I would say my career thus far is my biggest accomplishment, but in that career, I've had lots of opportunities that I've learned only now in retrospect have built off each other. Because I met my wife, I was able to, I had to shift and found different assignments, which opened other doors for both of us. And building on those assignments, I was able to take some of the lessons learned and apply them forward. And that accumulated in my jobs at SOCOM, which then in turn gave me the organizational change experience, the design experience, this kind of questioning, challenging mentality that then conveyed into my next step going forward in business consulting. So I don't think it's done. My journey is not done by any means. I'm just transitioning from one project to another. But I could not have done it if I stuck to my original plan. I could not have done it if I did not look at the opportunities and really kind of did design on myself. How do I make myself as good and as competitive as I can in order to take advantage of those opportunities when they come down the line? And it's that kind of flexibility and opportunistic mindset that really I think is the cornerstone of design thinking. It's preparedness and opportunity at the same time. That we are a lot more flexible than we give ourselves credit for. I started off the Enterprise Change Initiative right as COVID was starting to really pick up in the States. 1 month later, I was totally working remotely. If you had told me that 6 months, 3 months prior to that point, I don't think I would have said it was possible. But we did it. We pivoted and we made it happen. Other companies have done the same. Ford Motor Company, for example, is turning back leased space right now because they realize that there's no need for it anymore. So many of these things that we take for granted as foundational pieces of our society are now in debate. The fact that I'm having this interview here from my home office / guest bedroom is an example of that. That I'm just as capable of doing this here to you as I am to a stage somewhere at a mass gathering. And in fact, this is probably a better medium to get to more people with more durability over time. So, while COVID is tragic, and it's unfortunate that there was such a incredible loss of life, and that unfortunately it's resurging. I think it's taught us in the design community and in the business community that certain things that you think are off limits for challenging are not. The whole concept of going into work, the whole concept of what is work, The whole concept that you need to be geographically co-located in order to do something those are all paradigms that have been thrown out the window as a result. So hopefully once we get the pandemic under control, I think we'll find that some of the advances that have come out of this are going to be pretty revolutionary to the way ahead. And, combined with some of the contextual changes that are happening in the environment, it's going to combine for a pretty exciting time, I think.